about climate and energy. Um, really excited for you all to be here. And as you know, ClearPath, we focus a lot on conservative policies to scale up innovations to get clean energy technologies to market. And one of the things that we do is try to understand how voters think about this, and make sure that you all have access to that information and that data. And so really excited to be joined by Rich Thau, president of Engagious, and Kristen Soltis Anderson, president of Echelon Insights, who have been doing research on this topic for a number of years now. And before we get into their presentations, I wanted to introduce former Congressman Greg Walden, the former chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee and also chairman of the NRCC. So really honored to have Congressman Walden here with us today. So Congressman, I'll let you open this up.
Well, thank you, Luke, and greetings to Kristen and Rich, who do amazing work on figuring out where voters are. And I think when I tied together sort of my work in the political world as NRCC chairman over a couple of cycles, and then doing policy work on the Energy and Commerce Committee, it was clear that Americans want all the energy they can get. They want innovation. They want clean energy, and they want grid security, reliability, and they want us to lead globally. And so when I took over as chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I leaned on ClearPath a lot for understanding the best way to communicate what we were for, what we were trying to accomplish, and the fact that we actually had really good ideas. We just hadn't gotten them out there. We'd sort of been back in the shadows on some of these issues related to climate change and energy. And it really helped us, I think, launch a very positive initiative that became a bipartisan initiative to develop new innovation in America, to incentivize the right things at the right time, to give the private sector the opportunity to grow and expand, and to really put us in a leadership position globally, not through regulation, not through taxation, but through innovation, adaptation, conservation, all the things that, frankly, are just simply common sense when it comes to policy, when it comes to energy, and when it comes to what the American voters want. So I've been a big fan of ClearPath. I serve on their advisory board, and just think the work that the team does there is really, really helpful when you're trying to sleuth through what works, what doesn't, and frankly, how to better communicate our messages. And so I'm excited to be on this panel today and to hear from Kristen and Rich, who I've listened to a lot over the years and taken their wise counsel over the years, because how you talk about issues really matters as you try and drive the policy initiatives that you know make sense. So with that, Luke, as we say on the committee, I'll yield back the balance of my time and we'll get on with the program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Always a pleasure to hear your wise insights. So I am going to introduce Rich Thau. He's the president of Engagious. Rich and Engagious use the latest in social psychology and behavioral science to really go in and craft winning messages. And so Rich has been doing some research for ClearPath for a number of years. And what he's going to be able to share with you today is some in-depth interviews that he's done with some of your constituents around the country and live dial test focus groups. So with that, Rich Thau, president of Engagious.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Chairman Walden. It's great to be with all of you today. Let me just pop up my slides here and we can get started. I hope you can see this all right.
Yes.
All right. Excellent. So I'm going to talk today about making the conservative case for tax credits and clean energy exports. So for some context, each year we conduct message testing on forward-looking conservative positions on clean energy and climate. So in late 2024, we message tested the topics of preserving specific clean energy tax credits and eliminating barriers to selling American clean energy products overseas. Our respondents were in two categories. We had conservative Trump voters, and we had Biden to Trump swing voters. And these were across a wide variety of states. And we contrasted two different types of conservative messages in a point-counterpoint video debate. So Advocate 1 is basically sort of the voice of ClearPath. She talked about tax credits and clean energy exports and endorsed them. And Advocate 2 was a conservative critic, if you will, of Advocate 1's positions. So people heard a point-counterpoint debate on video. Let me explain just in a second how this worked. So respondents would see an advocate on screen. They received basically an email link to a online survey. Embedded in the survey were videos, and they evaluated those videos moment by moment for how much they agreed or disagreed in real time. Basically, they moved this little red dot back and forth between 0 and 100, 0 being totally disagree and 100 being totally agree. And what I'm going to play for you in a little bit are some of the video snippets from those dial tests, those online dial tests. So let's talk first about defending tax credits. The overall framing on this topic is we need to build upon Trump's visionary energy policy. While Biden's IRA is deeply flawed, its energy tax credits support Trump's vision and help the U.S. counter Russian and Chinese global influence. There are 5 themes that fall within this overall framing. The first is, here's what's wrong with the IRA. One sample message out of many, it's just a sample. It expanded a tax credit to buy electric vehicles, which benefit the wealthy at others' expense. The second theme, but the IRA provides crucial funding for Trump's 2020 law. If we get rid of the IRA entirely, then we're erasing one of President Trump's legislative victories. We're talking here about the Energy Act of 2020.
In fact,
sorry, let me jump back for a second. The third theme is we're reclaiming the few good parts of the IRA. And the sample message is, let's take back the good Republican policies that the Democrats claim as their own. So I'm now going to play the first of several dial test snippets. Let me explain how this works. The scale is from 0 to 100, the y-axis. The higher it goes, the more people agree. The more it drops, the less they agree. Ignore the lines on the screen now. Those are the last 30 seconds of responses. And instead, please focus between the arrows on the right edge of the screen. That's where the new information comes in. So rough rule of thumb, you want to be at least above 70, ideally above 80.
In fact, several provisions of the IRA build on the earlier Energy Act of 2020, which President Trump signed into law. For instance, the Energy Act called for the efficient investment of research and development dollars, prioritizing next-generation technologies and energy grid modernization. But Trump's law wasn't fully funded by Congress. It turns out the IRA provides the crucial funding to make those provisions a reality. If we get rid of the IRA entirely in 2025, then we'll be erasing one of President Trump's legislative victories. We would not want that to happen. Instead, let's take back the good Republican policies that the Democrats claimed as their own.
So very strong messaging with both of these categories, and really gives you a nice way to thread the needle on what can be a very difficult and nuanced conversation. So here's how these swing voters talk about this.
The election was so, divisive, Democrats against Republicans. So to me, it was about bringing the two sides together, bringing the IRA and then Trump's policies together, the best, bringing the best of both worlds together to make one great policy.
So why did this message work? What happened? What did she say there that suddenly you're like, whoa, I'm for this now? Anybody? Marina, go ahead.
It sounded like action was taking place, and there was an understanding that there was misleading, that, that it was started with the Republicans. The Democrats were trying to take credit for it. And it just provided a little bit more clarity between the two and what might be happening or perceived to be happening.
So suddenly those energy tax credits are okay because you learned that these were Republican ideas to begin with?
I definitely feel more comfortable.
Why are you guys supportive of this?
a Trump guy.
Okay, so
Honestly, I think he has a lot of good policies.
by a show of fingers, who would say that you support what you just heard because it's a Trump policy? Show of fingers, who would say that? So nearly all of you. Fourth theme is we need to do this to counter Russia. If a country doesn't have its own gas or nuclear program, they should turn to U.S. innovation, not Russian.
If a country doesn't have its own program for natural gas or nuclear energy, we'd rather they turn to American innovation, not Russian. We can't allow our adversaries to keep expanding their global dominance, which puts our interests at risk. As a nation, we have to invest in energy innovation, or it could lead to dire consequences, not just here, but in other parts of the world.
I would rather see the otherworldly countries come to us and us supply them with natural resources rather than one of our adversaries like Russia, who seems to be taking it over now.
And we need to do this to counter China. We can't allow China to keep expanding its global dominance, which puts our interests at risk.
Everything she said makes sense to me, that we want to, we want to produce, we want to have the jobs, we want to have the control, rather than being dependent on buying from someone else or letting China take a huge lead. I think we want to narrow that gap.
All right, so let's pivot now and talk briefly about trade and tariffs. The framing is make it here, sell it globally, and counter China. The first theme, others should buy U.S. clean energy technologies. We need a strategic pro-market trade policy that eliminates barriers to our energy products and services.
We need countries coming to us. We need a bigger footprint as far as these smaller countries. Instead of going to Russia and China, they're getting bigger while we're getting smaller in the tech world.
Our energy exports face stiff tariffs in other countries. Consumers in other countries should not be penalized for buying high-quality American products. China is projecting its strength globally. China is the top trading partner to 120 countries.
We need a strategic pro-market trade policy that eliminates barriers to our energy products and services across international markets. It's concerning that China is the top trading partner to more than 120 countries. We want other nations to look to America instead of China.
What do you folks hear when you hear that? Are you troubled by what China's doing in other countries?
I am.
You are, Linda? Why?
I am because they cheat, and they're just like she said, all they're trying to do is be able to just sell what they can possibly sell with no concern for, I guess, global anything. It's all just self-centered so they can be, the number one world power. And that concerns me because I know firsthand, being in Louisiana, and I think it's Bobby or Doug from Texas. I mean, the oil field industry, obviously in Louisiana at least, is very prominent. So anything that's done, a lot of these companies, Exxon, whomever, do business in China as well. And they can undermine us and do things much cheaper, again, with no regard to the right way of doing them. And the companies tend to go with whomever they can get the best deal with. And it's concerning to me from our economy.
And we want other nations to look to the U.S. instead of China. To compete globally, we need to develop the best products and better financing mechanisms to make them affordable.
To compete globally, we need to develop the best products and better financing mechanisms to make them affordable so that trading partners choose American technologies rather than Chinese or Russian.
Why do we want anyone turning to any other country other than the US, right? We are here, and everyone that is contributing to taxes, I'd assume, would want it to come back into this country for better development as opposed to outside resources.
Very quickly, let me just wrap up by talking about the importance of not being dismissive of climate as a topic. So here's what the other advocate said in a small part of her presentation. Watch what happens to the two lines.
In fact, a recent report by the US government assessing the various risks facing humanity said that climate change is not an existential or global catastrophic threat. Actually, I don't know why we're concerned about climate change at all.
Absolutely plummeted. Why?
When she said that, it was like, no. I mean, because it is a concern.
We need to be concerned with climate change.
There should be some concern. I don't think we should disregard it.
I mean, I'm concerned about the climate.
Just what happened in the western part of the state here in North Carolina with the hurricane near the Appalachian Mountains and all. The climate change has been bad.
As somebody who lives on the beach, there are effects going on with climate change. We got houses going in the ocean. So I have kind of a big disagreement on that.
Yeah, I took a vacation to Alaska this summer, and the glaciers that used to be over there are now there. So there's proof that it's 3/4 melted in, and they even had markers showing where they were at what year. So there's your proof right there. Something's going on. So I think it is a problem.
So with that, I'll hand it back to Luke.
Well, thanks, Rich. Always really interesting and exciting to see some of that. So before I turn to Kristen, just wanted to remind you all, if you have questions for Kristen, Rich, or Chairman Walden, you can drop them into the Q&A function that's down at the bottom of the screen. So with that, I'll welcome Kristen Soltis Anderson, who is a founding partner of Echelon Insights. She's also a columnist at the New York Times, where I think she brings some much needed common sense to the publication, writing about polling and elections and the Republican Party. So Kristen just wrapped a nationwide survey of voters across the country just a couple weeks ago, and she's going to share some of the results from that. Thanks, Kristen.
All right. Thank you so much, Luke. I will go ahead and share my screen, and we will dive right into this presentation. So to set up what I'm about to show you, we at Echelon Insights have been so glad to be partnered with ClearPath on research about what Americans think about clean energy and climate, going back many, many, many years. The data I'm going to show you today has trend lines going all the way back to 2020. We have been fortunate enough to do this research with them almost every year, where we go into the field and we don't just survey 1,000 registered voters. We don't just survey 2,000 registered voters. We survey, in this case, 4,000 registered voters. And the reason why we do this survey with as many people as we do is we're able to take this data and not just look at what voters across the country think, not just look at what Republicans, independents, and Democrats think, but we can take this data and use some statistical techniques and modeling to give us an estimate of what the result would be in every single congressional district and state across the country. ClearPath uses this. They load it up into a tool where you can look district by district at what the results are modeled to be for your particular congressional district or state, so that you can get a better understanding of how these issues play across the country. So what I'll present to you today is the data from our newest survey, which we conducted back in January, as well as trend lines, again, going all the way back to 2020 of how the public either has or hasn't changed on some of these issues over time. So the bottom line here is voters want to see action from congressional Republicans when it comes to clean energy. We've been asking this question for a long time. How important is it to you that your member of Congress supports policies that promote clean energy? And you can see that that green line has been far and away stronger than anything else, going all the way back to 2020. We've seen it also tick up just a little bit relative to last year. So great news there for advocates of clean energy. This is something that voters across the board are telling us is important. And when we ask voters, do you believe that your member of Congress should care about this issue? 81% say yes. But for Republicans, a challenge is that only 48% of voters believe we actually do care about clean energy. Now, the good news is this is an improvement. We have been seeing that the appetite for seeing Republicans talk about clean energy has been very strong and again has ticked up a little bit in the last year. But there's also good news for those Republicans who have been on this message that we've seen improvement since 2023 in the percentage of voters who say Republicans do care about clean energy. So plenty of room to grow, but we're also seeing that red line trend in the right direction. And the good news as well for Republicans who are focused on this issue is that your base wants it as well. When we look at this question, how important is it to you that your member of Congress supports policies that promote clean energy? Again, we showed that for the overall sample, this number was very high, but it's also very high when we just look at the Republicans we surveyed. And in fact, this number has grown pretty significantly over the time that we've been doing this project. Back in 2021, it was 54% who said yes, it was important to them that their member of Congress support policies to promote clean energy. A good number, but it's moved in the right direction where now it's at 62% say it is important to them that their member of Congress support policies on this issue. And the other thing that I think is really exciting is that this unites a lot of different factions of the party. We've been dividing up Republicans in our survey for many years on the basis of whether they think of themselves as a Trump supporter first and foremost. You heard in Rich's focus group, one of the respondents say, look, I'm just a Trump guy. We want to know for people who think of themselves as first and foremost a Trump guy or gal, how do they feel? And then for those who say, you know, when I think of myself as being a Republican, I think about the party first, less so than being a Trump fan first and foremost. Doesn't mean they don't like Donald Trump, but it just means how they think about their allegiance to the party. There are some questions where we see really big divides between the Trump first and party first type people. But this isn't one of those areas. We see even among the Trump first Republicans, 58% of them say they think that it is important that their member of Congress support policies to promote clean energy. And when we look at the districts, again, we model this out district by district. When we look at this district by district, we find that there are 56 Republican districts where we find a pretty interesting gap between the percentage who say Republicans should care about this and the percentage who say Republicans do care about this. So these are districts where there's a real appetite, but maybe not necessarily as much of a sense that Republicans are doing something. And I think in these 56 districts is where we have the most opportunity for exciting growth. We tend to find that it is districts that Republicans hold narrowly, where we find the biggest agreement with the statement, clean energy is an issue Republicans in Congress should care about. This isn't something where it's just people in Democratic blue districts saying, gosh, those mean old Republicans, I wish they cared more about this issue. In fact, the bluer the district, the less we necessarily see people as concerned about this. But if you see a district where Republicans are winning, but it's a narrow margin of victory, that's where we see some of the appetite for Republicans to focus on this issue the highest. So, okay, what does this all mean then in terms of policy? If they say they want clean energy solutions, what does that mean in practice? In our most recent survey, we tested 5 different policies, and these are in some ways a pretty vague statement. There's going to be a lot more detail in how you would implement each of these items if they came to fruition, but we wanted to just get people's gut sense of what do they think about the idea overall. So we tested 5 things: tax incentives for American companies that develop clean energy technology, tax incentives for manufacturers of things like, say, steel and cement to emit less carbon, permitting reform, tariffs on goods from other countries that you would consider that are considered carbon intensive, and then promoting underground carbon sequestration. When we test these, we find that they generally get a lot of support, or at least in the case of sequestration, the opposition isn't really strong. There's a lot of question marks in the minds of some voters about what does that actually mean, and they'll say they're unsure. But for the rest of the policies we tested, the support versus opposed numbers are really incredible, especially some of these tax incentives, either incentives to companies that are innovating in the clean energy space or incentives to those in manufacturing and industry to do what they do, but do it cleaner. We see pretty robust support there. And that remains the case when we just look at the Republicans in our sample. This is something that we know is going to be popular with voters in the center, but it's also something that holds up really well when we look just at the Republicans that we surveyed. Now, looking a little bit at this conversation around climate change, I want to direct your attention to this red line at the bottom, because this is what we also saw in Rich's dial tests. The notion that, well, climate change just isn't happening, we just shouldn't be focused on it, really isn't something that any voters or in any numbers are on board with. And that has been a really consistent figure that we've seen over the years. It's why we have felt so confident advising folks to be able to feel comfortable being out there on this issue, that the idea that climate change just simply isn't happening isn't something that anything more than a negligible portion of the electorate really believes. And then when we ask them, okay, well then do you believe that we can reduce these emissions in a way that doesn't require us to impose new regulations? Can we actually address this in a way that doesn't mean we have to have big government step in and push down a bunch of new regs? The good news is that that voters overall do believe this is the case. And that the percentage who say they don't believe this is the case has been declining since 2021. Now, there's a little bit more uncertainty. People are still hungry for more information about how would we make this happen, but belief that, nope, the only way we're going to be able to do this is by regulating our way out of the problem has just been losing traction with the public. And when we present it as a forced choice, what do people believe? Between these two statements, that either stricter regulations of carbon emissions is going to be the best way to fight climate change, or rather than more regulation, more innovation and better technology that lets us reduce carbon emissions, that's the best way to fight climate change. We find 61% of our respondents choosing that statement over this kind of regulation first approach. And when we ask people, again, do you believe that you can have your cake and eat it too? That it's possible for us to develop cleaner energy sources that also provide more affordable energy? Overwhelmingly, people say yes. When the left has a message that, look, the only way we're going to be able to do this is making energy more expensive so that people use less of it, it's just not where voters are at. They very much believe we can have cleaner energy and more affordable energy. These two things do not need to be thought of as in tension. And so then how should you talk about energy? Well, as I noted, affordability and clean, those are not opposing concepts. They are something that can go hand in hand. And what we find when we ask voters to choose between a couple of different attributes that they think are important when it comes to energy, the top of that list, affordable, clean, and reliable. You see affordable and reliable particularly popping there among Republicans, but clean is still thoroughly in the mix. It's something that's right up there with many of the other items that we tested as one that they're potentially really interested in. You also see that among independents, clean comes in second place. So there's no need to think of affordable and clean as separate or different or at odds. What voters are telling us is they see them going hand in hand. And especially when we look at our respondents, just looking at Republicans and breaking it out by age, we find that it's especially the case among our younger Republicans that clean is an important attribute they want to see in the mix. Clean, sustainable, efficient. Those are all right up there with reliable in terms of what younger Republicans are also really telling us that they are looking for. So I think we have a lot of really exciting things to work with there in terms of what Republicans are telling us they want from their members, what swing voters are telling us what they want from their members. And there's a lot of really good opportunities for Republicans to be the ones who own this issue. So Luke, I'll hand it back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Kristen and Rich. We do have a number of communications professionals, Republican communications professionals from the Hill and the administration. So for you all, if you want to just ask a question, drop it into the Q&A function, and I can read them to Rich and Kristen and Chairman Walden. But wanted to maybe just kick a question to you all first. And generally, you've been doing this research on behalf of ClearPath for a number of years, but you do a lot of other work for other clients as well. Is there anything that jumps out to you in this research or surprises you from your expertise in the field? And maybe Kristen, I'll start with you.
Sure. So there's, in one sense, there's not a lot that is a big surprise because we've been doing this project for so long. We've have this robust amount of data that shows over time just how consistent this appetite for clean energy conversation has been. But something that I do think is notable, and I don't want to call it a surprise, but rather a pleasant discovery, is that the number of Americans who do believe that Republicans care about clean energy has begun to increase. This is a winnable battle. And when Republicans really put effort into talking about this, you can see it begin to pay dividends in that trend line. And I'm optimistic that if we come back into the field a year from now and we take a look, that we'll see that line getting even stronger.
Oh, thanks, Kristen. Rich, anything?
Yeah, what stood out for me in this research, and as you mentioned, Luke, we do a project like this each year, was the ability of the advocate on representing ClearPath to make a compelling case for maintaining tax credits that were part of the IRA, that you didn't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. It didn't make sense to get rid of every single provision in the IRA when there were some good ones that enhanced Trump's agenda and Trump's successes from 2020. So I really want to stress that because that's really important. Sometimes it's hard to make a nuanced case in a political message. This time it really worked, and much to my pleasant surprise.
So I think I understood it from your dial test, tying if say any of the members do support an individual credit, that's a tool to help President Trump achieve his agenda. Is that generally what was working and resonating?
That's exactly it. So the idea being that President Trump had this law that he signed in 2020 that did all these magnificent things to enhance America's energy security and enhance American innovation. And that if you get rid of the IRA entirely, you're undermining Trump's earlier first-term achievement. You don't want to do that. And so if you're able to call for things that enhance and build upon that achievement, which requires keeping some provisions of the IRA in place, you're perfectly justified in doing that.
Okay, thanks. And Chairman Walden, you've been, the recipient of a lot of different polling presentations over the years. Is there anything from this that may stand out or surprise you?
Well, to use a couple of terms that are right above your shoulder there's a clear path forward on these energy issues for Republicans. And I think Americans want innovation, they want reliability, they want efficiency, they want affordability. And oftentimes when we've been in these arguments with the left, they discount a lot of that. They sort of ignore the issue on reliability. They think actually in some cases pricing energy higher means consumers will reduce how much they consume, forgetting the fact you still have to like drive to work and turn the cook dinner and whatever else. And so I think we're actually where Americans are. And I think the data that Kristen and Rich put forward confirm that. And then it's just about how do we talk about our ideas. And the president, I was there when we did the energy bill back in 19 and 20. And it has a lot of good policy there that Republicans should embrace and support. And sure, the IRA threw in a few other things and that you could get rid of that don't make sense and aren't efficient and wasteful. But boy, the template's there, the policy's there, and I think the messaging opportunity is there.
One of the questions is generally, do you think voters understand or know what the IRA is, or is it just synonymous with a bad Biden policy?
Yeah, I think that's probably right if they know it at all. But I think the worst thing that happens to Republicans that don't spend time in this area, they get caught flat-footed at a town hall or in some speech somewhere, and they don't have an answer. And yet they should have an answer because we've got the right policies. I think if you put Biden around IRA, that's going to influence what people think of the IRA. Just like if you put Trump around energy, Trump voters are going to go, yeah, well, if he's for it, then it must be good policy. But I think members of Congress and their comms teams and staff have to understand there's a lot to work with here in a very positive way to position your member of Congress in a way that shows they get the issue, they believe in the issue, and they've got real ideas to move America forward, to be more dominant, to create clean energy that's affordable, and to have grids that work when cold snaps hit.
Rich, did you test any of that or ask any of the folks in your focus group specifically about understanding the specific policy, the specific name, the IRA?
There's generally a pretty low level of knowledge about the IRA among swing voters. It is better known among more conservative Trump voters for the fact that it was criticized for several years in the news outlets where they get their information. So the more conservative you are, the more likely you are to have heard of it and to think badly of it. So that creates a little bit of a headwind, you would think, in the messaging. But when you're able to say, wait a second, there's stuff in there that Trump has used that's helped advance Trump policies from 2020, people go, wait a second, so there's stuff in there that we shouldn't get rid of entirely? Then okay, there's always a concern that you're going overboard and you're being overly aggressive in getting rid of things. And taking a scalpel as opposed to a sledgehammer tends to be a better approach.
And Kristen, I don't know if you had that specifically in your polling, but I know you've tested over the years things like the quote unquote Green New Deal. And generally what I recall is that voters don't always know exactly the way we talk about things in the Beltway, what specifically a policy is or was or what it does. But do you have any insights on specifically IRA or any of the big policies that we talk about?
Yeah, so the IRA is one of those policies that is so big and so broad, and I think Rich and Congressman Walden have accurately described how there's some initial skepticism because of the way the IRA has been, sort of talked about, especially in conservative media, and frankly, the fact that it was named the Inflation Reduction Act, and I think a lot of voters were saying, "Did this in fact reduce inflation? Right. Are we sure that's what that was going to do?" I think there's an element of the name of it that has left people feeling a little sour about the whole thing. But as you saw in all of our data, the idea that there's stuff we can be doing to get clean energy moving forward, don't let it be tied up in this bill that may have had a bunch of things in it that may have failed to have achieved that ultimate inflation reduction goal. That doesn't mean you have to get rid of the stuff that is actually positive. I do think that voters, even if they're not policy wonks and even if they're not down in the details, if you just tell them there's some stuff that's good, there's some stuff that's bad, let's get rid of the bad and let's keep the good, they're savvy enough to sort of get that.
Thanks. Really good question on how the language of dominance works. So, President Trump uses energy dominance. You also sometimes hear American energy leadership. Do any of the three of you have any insights into how energy dominance may perform, or generally that phrasing? And curious if Chairman Walden, if that was something, because that's not a new term. That was something that was used in the first administration and during the campaign. And if that was something that voters really resonate with, and if that's something that you or your colleagues would use in an effective way.
Yeah, we used to talk about all of the above energy. And of course, I would throw in all of the below too, because oil and gas actually really matter too, or geothermal or whatever. I think President Trump sort of coined energy dominance in an America First agenda that says we actually have the ability to lead. You have to go back a lot of decades to remember the Arab oil embargo and what that did for, gas lines in America. And just the sense that somehow we were going to be held economically and energy hostage to other countries was repugnant and not in the American spirit. And so I think we've come a long way to say we're going to be energy dominant in the world, and we can be. I think the key when you're talking about in terms of client is to make sure when you talk about dominance, you're talking about not just, you're not going to throw the doors open to a lot of pollution, right? People want efficient, they want clean. They want affordable energy. And I think we can have all three of those and be dominant. But I'd love to hear what our certified smart pollsters and messengers have to say on it.
Yeah, the one thing that I would add to that is the idea of America being able to handle its own energy needs and do so easily, do so affordably, do so cleanly is very, very, very popular. The one thing to bear in mind is that there are some folks that begin to wonder, does this mean we're going to be in the business of selling our energy around the world? And I found that that can be a place where some voters get a little bit concerned. On the one hand, you would love the idea that we're sending American energy all around the world. We're dominating, we're beating other countries. But there, to the extent people go, well, wait a minute, why aren't we keeping stuff here at home for us? Even if that's not really the intention of the policy, it's one sort of messaging thing to keep in mind that voters want us to be dominant, but they get a little bit concerned if they think the idea is that we're going to be developing energy here to then sell it elsewhere. Hey, wait a minute, why aren't we keeping it at home?
I would completely agree. Kristen, that's one of the most important insights I think I've uncovered in the last several years, is that if you're going to be promoting exports, conservatives want themselves to have access to it first before it's sold to anybody outside our borders. That's a critically important point. To make the argument sort of casually that we're going to export this and export that, they're thinking to themselves, wait a second, other people are going to get it and I can't get it here. And that's completely verboten. So you really need to focus on American innovation means that Americans get access to these sources first, these technologies first, and then once we've successfully met everybody's demands, then we can start selling it overseas. I make that really clear.
I think that's a really important point because it is, we've gone through so many generations of we will never be energy independent to now be to a point where we could be energy independent. I think you're both right that people go, oh, wait a minute, I thought we didn't have enough energy. Are we going to run out if we export it and sell it to somebody else? And I think that's in the back of people's minds just because that's been our history. It doesn't have to be our future.
Another really good question, opinions on fracking or hydraulic fracturing. I don't know if that came up in this year's research, but I know that's something that you all have thought about and looked into a lot. Any thoughts on voter opinions of that?
While we didn't test it in this survey, I would point to the 2024 election and the ways in which one of the candidates tried to bend over backwards to try to half undo, but not really pass statements on it. It's clear, in my view, where the winds have shifted on this issue, and there's a reason why in important key swing states, it was considered politically toxic to be on the other side of it.
I think Kristen nailed it.
I agree.
Fun fact that we like to share, since we've talked some on tax incentives, but hydraulic fracturing, the technology benefited from clean energy tax incentives in the 80s, 90s, and also some good R&D work from the Department of Energy to help that technology scale up and be a huge part of our economy and a great asset now. So anecdotal evidence of how a good tax incentive can be used. Another question on just general demand and the rise of AI and data centers, and does that impact voters' attention to energy at all?
So I would love to tackle this question. So while this wasn't something we tested in this survey, we've done a lot of other research for other projects about AI. America is still really wrapping their mind around it. They know that AI is the next big thing. They know that the growth there is explosive. But I think the dots are not yet connected on the idea that AI isn't just a tech issue. AI is an infrastructure issue. And I feel like that phraseology gets abused in politics a lot, especially by the Democrats, frankly, that like everything is infrastructure. But this really is one of those cases where AI is an infrastructure issue, and it is specifically an energy infrastructure issue. So while I don't feel like Americans have quite connected those dots yet, I think that it is going to be right for them to do so, especially as in communities across the country, they start having these really robust debates about, wait a minute, a data center is going in. Does that create jobs? But what does that do to the grid in our area? And so to the extent that I've been doing polling on this, it's more for like local clients that are having issues in local areas where a new data center is going in and they want to figure out, how do we make this all work so that we're building energy to supply our data center, and we're doing so in a way that works with the local community that's there as well.
Yeah, I would caution that you tread very carefully in the AI conversation with people who might be feeling as though their jobs are at risk because of AI, which we're hearing plenty of conversation about now in the federal government. We're going to be hearing a lot more about that. There's the drain on the grid, Kristen referenced, and the cost that that might mean for them as consumers. If they have to pay more for energy because some data center went in 10 miles or 50 miles from their house. So I would just want to make sure before you go whole hog and endorsing everything AI that you recognize that the human impacts and the political consequences of those human impacts are likely to be profound. And you got to leave yourself some wiggle room for how you talk about this because things are going to be changing.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I couldn't agree more. I'd also like to know, and I know we've got a question here too on permitting reform, but what about nuclear renaissance? I mean, I go back to the days where the left was completely against nuclear power, and yet I think we've seen a real resurgence and a renaissance in terms of nuclear. Are you seeing that in any of your data?
Kristen, you want to go first? Do you have any?
Sure. So we still see that in our data, nuclear gets a like, I have a couple concerns. It's not as polarizing along party lines as you might find other types of energy. Instead, we find that there are gaps on nuclear by gender. So men more comfortable with nuclear than women, rather than it being sort of a right-left divide. But I do think there is an increasing awareness that if you're going to have clean, affordable energy, that you need look no further than what's happening in Europe to see that when they've shut down all of their nuclear capabilities, it made them more dependent than ever on our adversaries in order to power their country. And so, if nothing else, I think an interesting way to talk to Republicans about this is to point to Europe, which they have plenty of skepticism about, not necessarily the biggest fans of these days, and say, look at the bind they've put themselves in by cutting off this incredible ability to power themselves.
Yeah. And I would just quickly add that some of the work I did years ago, this is not fresh, but this lingered in my mind, is that people who live near a nuclear power facility tend to be more positive about it, and people who live very far away, for whom it seems more of a unfamiliar threat. And so you drive past one every day when you go to work or when you're shopping, it's like, oh, it's there. You just get kind of used to it. It's part of the landscape. But if you don't see one regularly, it's this foreign type of thing that you can impose a lot of negativity toward potentially if you're concerned about the safety of nuclear power.
I'll add, we saw some interesting research done around nuclear, and using the phrase new in front of nuclear increased positivity by a lot. And that's often what we're talking about in the US anyway, is we have 94 existing reactors, but we're talking a lot about next generation advanced reactors, but calling it new nuclear increased that positivity.
And also small modular.
Yeah. Chairman Walden did bring up permitting, and we have a good question. I know a lot of this matters. Is permitting reform something that voters understand, know about, care about?
So let me back into it, Luke, by saying that they're not following a debate over permitting the way the four of us and people on this call are following a debate about permitting. What they are aware of and what frustrates them is all the bureaucracy that hinders the ability of government to do the things that they think government should be doing. So when you talk about the need to enhance America's energy independence and its energy innovation, and that this bureaucracy gets in the way, that's something they want to circumvent. That's something they want to fix. So that's where permitting is a potent argument, because it's about the things that America needs to be doing that right now, because of bureaucracy, it can't.
I would just add that in our survey, the way we tested it, we described it as reforms to fix the lengthy permitting process that slows the building of new clean energy generation. And phrased that way, we found 70% saying they would support it, only 18% saying that they would oppose it. Among Republicans, you still get that 2/3 saying that they support reforms to how we handle that process. And the other thing that I would add that I wonder to what extent, I mean, this survey that I did was done in early January. So we were in the field while some of the, what was going on with the wildfires was happening out in California. But I don't yet know if the stories had really permeated yet about how difficult it's going to be for people to rebuild their homes, or the challenges that, say, the National Forest Service had in doing the sorts of things they would have needed to do to properly maintain forests, because environmental groups and because of processes to do things, the government just gums up the work so much. And so, I don't know, California being a bad example of what not to do, has now tragically been in the news so much more. I do wonder to what extent this is going to raise the salience of, oh my gosh, can you believe the government has gotten in the way of all of these common sense things that we should be doing? This is ridiculous. I do wonder, if I were to go to the field now, would we find that number even better?
It's really interesting. I know that's going to be a hot topic, probably all Congress, but definitely this year. Definitely wanted to thank you all and thank everybody for joining. This has been really helpful, really insightful. Just for everybody on the call, we have all this available to do briefings with your member or committees if that's something of interest. And maybe before we depart, if there's any top line takeaways for a Republican Hill communicator or somebody in the administration from the research.
You can't go wrong saying that you want to promote affordable, clean, reliable energy.
I was going to say basically the exact same thing.
I would stick to that, and you'll be on firm footing.
Affordable, clean, reliable energy. All right. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you all for joining. And ClearPathAction.org is where a lot of this data is housed. We also have the interactive map at ClearPathAction.org. If you go to the public opinion section, it's a drop down, and you can go look at your congressional district and see where the data is modeled for that. So with that, thank you all very much, and we will let everyone get back to their very busy days. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Take care.